like small? Is it like small seed type things, or is it?
We do early and late stage. We just got into crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Like the new Stella that's open. July. Mueller.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Oh.
So that's pretty cool. Book of Dead. One of Tim Lee's. Tim Lee's movies.
Nice. That's interesting.
All right. Let's do all the.
It's always good when there's money.
Yeah, money's good, dude. It's not bad.
Solves problems.
It can.
Certain problems.
Still, man, wise words. More money, more problems. Hey.
Feel like working.
I mean, I like my manager. I like our team. Some of the leadership really not through yet. Like the startup world, you'll have a hard time letting go of responsibilities.
Okay. Yeah. So having specialization.
Yeah. But we're growing out of teams.
Do some Laravel stuff.
Really good. Yeah. All of our applications are Laravel. Starting to move more towards.
All right. We got a packed house. I'm going to go ahead and get things started. So, welcome to the Laravel Austin meetup for November 1st. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Review Push, for providing all the lovely pizza and brownies and soda in the back. If you haven't had a chance to get some, I believe there's stuff left back there. I can't really see all of it, but absolutely dig in so that I don't have to take any of it home. I can't even eat the stuff. Some quick housekeeping. We've got the Austin PHP meetup next Thursday. This will be the point where I find Ian in the audience and point at him and ask what it's about. But it looks like he's either not able to make it or the buses are screwing him over. So definitely recommend checking it out. Our next meetup will be next month on December 6th. As for conferences coming up, we've got PHP World coming up in a couple of weeks, November 14th to the 15th. It's a lot of fun. I went last year. I'm not able to make it this year, but highly recommend it as a conference. Yes, Eric.
Yeah, the Austin PHP meetup is going to be a talk from Magento, talking about different types of tests and why some of the traditional approaches may not work for your code base.
Awesome. So if you would like to learn more about testing from the Magento crew, definitely recommend checking out Austin PHP next week. And then this conference isn't really soon because it's in May, but I figured I'd mention it anyway since it's a local put on by myself and a few other the organizers from Austin PHP conference, Longhorn PHP. We just put our early bird tickets on sale now. You can get the conference tickets for $200, tutorial by itself for $100, and the whole package for $300. May 2nd to May 4th. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're starting to line up. We got a lot of cool presentations already submitted to our CFP. We're hunting down some awesome keynoters, and it's going to be a great time. We did have to unfortunately move it out of April because the whole thing with lunar holidays is that they move around, and we didn't think much people were going to show up around Easter weekend to our conference. So May. Absolutely recommend checking it out. And if you'd like to speak at the conference, you can go to cfp.longhornphp.com, submit a talk or two, or 10, maybe not 10, but we are still accepting submissions all the way to December 15th at 11:59:59. It's basically before midnight. So yeah, that's all the fun stuff that I have. So I'm now going to turn it over to tonight's presenter, Nick. And he does have a last name. I was just going to butcher it over.
No worries. We'll go over that.
So let's get into it. So you may have heard about the new CSS framework on the block, and that's Tailwind CSS. And it's already caused quite a stir by proposing a radically different approach to CSS than many of us are used to. So we'll unpack what it is, what all the fuss is about, why it's useful, and how to use it with Laravel. So let's start flying with Tailwind CSS. Before we get started, let me take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Nick Basile. I'm a full-stack developer and UX UI designer based right here in Austin. Since I'm at this meetup, y'all can probably guess that I work with Laravel. I also use Vue.js, Tailwind CSS, and a few other technologies to round out my stack. I'm currently a UX instructor at Lambda School, where over the course of 6 months, I teach people how to be user experience designers. So we're much more intensive than your typical boot camp, but we're still cheaper and faster than getting a degree. Plus, we only charge our students after they've landed a job paying $50K a year or more a year, so you can be sure we're motivated to help them land one. So if y'all are looking for new dev talent, let me know. We can get you hooked up and roll with that. So I've been working with Tailwind CSS since it came out October 31st last year, so pretty much exactly 1 year yesterday. So over that time, I've launched several products and websites using it, and I've written extensively about it as well. I wrote an intro to Tailwind for CSS Tricks, which launched me onto the Tailwind map, so to speak, and I've also written a series of other articles on my personal blog, nick-basile.com, covering various aspects of Tailwind. So over the last year, I've been pretty active in the Tailwind community, to say the least. And I do it all over again, too, because Tailwind has radically changed how I approach CSS for the better. But before we get into that, let's start at the beginning. What is Tailwind CSS? So according to its documentation, Tailwind is a utility-first CSS framework for rapidly building custom user interfaces. It was built by Adam Wathan, Jonathan Raynick, David Hempfield, and Steve Schoger. So all the Laravel elite, so to speak, are represented mostly. So now that's a nice sentence, but what does that mean in practice? So let's pick out some of the key ideas here and reorder them a bit. So we have CSS framework, custom interfaces, utility first, and rapid. So let's run through each of these and what they mean. So Tailwind is a CSS framework. It provides a bunch of classes that we can use to style our interfaces. However, it is different from a lot of other CSS frameworks, like Bootstrap or Bulma, because it's not a UI kit. It does not provide out-of-the-box designs or components for us to use. And this leads me to my next point, custom interfaces. How many times have we written with Bootstrap to make our design look less like Bootstrap? I know I've done it over and over again. Tailwind, on the other hand, has no opinion about how you style your site or how it should look, and it doesn't impose any design decisions that you have to fight to undo. Instead, it provides us with the building blocks that we can use to piece together our UIs, which we can customize however we like in the Tailwind config file. And these building blocks are utility classes, which is my next bullet point here. So when they started Tailwind, the team realized that a framework for building custom UIs means you can't provide abstractions at the usual level of buttons, forms, cards, and nav bars. There's just too much opinion that goes into those elements. So instead, Tailwind provides highly composable, low-level utility classes that make it easy to build complex user interfaces without encouraging any two sites to look alike. And these utility classes take the form of stuff like text center, or flex, or shadow. And applying those classes to an element would set the text align to center, the display to flex, and add a box shadow. That's pretty simple, right? So now having a bunch of classes on our elements would seem pretty overwhelming. But that's why it's a utility-first framework, not a utility framework. Once we're happy with our styles and ready to extract components, Tailwind makes it easy to make them using the same utilities that we originally used, so everything stays consistent. Finally, Tailwind is perfect for rapid UI development. I will explain this in more detail a bit later, but Tailwind makes it so easy to quickly put together a custom UI that works for your project. Putting that all back together, we can say that Tailwind is a utility-first CSS framework for rapidly building custom interfaces. But if that's all Tailwind is, then what's all the fuss about? As you may or may not know, Tailwind has generated a fair amount of controversy when it was released and still. And the arguments against it are typically the following. It's not semantic CSS, or you've completely destroyed your separation of concerns. You're adding how many classes to an element, you're insane, you're crazy, what are you doing? And then a lot of people like to say that's basically the same thing as inline styling. And y'all may have some other reservations, and that's perfectly all right. This is new stuff. And we can cover those all at the end. Unfortunately for us, Adam Wadlam has written an excellent article covering these arguments and other arguments about Tailwind. So he'll be our spiritual guide, so to speak, for these answers. But let's start at the top. So Tailwind apparently is not semantic and doesn't adhere to the separation of concerns. And with separation of concerns, the idea is that your HTML should only contain information about your content. And all of your styling decisions should be in your CSS. So if we look at these examples, we can see that the top approach violates separation of concerns because we've let styling information bleed into our HTML. Whereas if we factored it in the bottom approach, we give the element a class name based on its content and use the classes as a hook in your CSS to style your markup. So this is perfectly semantic right here. And now this is great, but it's a pretty simple example. And in reality, our code tends to look a bit more like this. So here, we've kind of got like an author bio component. So it's just me, who I am, and then the styling to go along with it. And here our concerns are indeed separated. But there's still a very obvious coupling between my CSS and my HTML. Most of the time, our CSS is like a mirror, or can be a mirror, for our markup, where it perfectly reflects the HTML structure with nested CSS selectors, like we can see with the image and the div and the H2. That's SCSS, I don't know if it's not vanilla, so everyone knows. So while this markup isn't concerned with styling decisions, our CSS is very concerned with the markup structure. So maybe, in this approach, our concerns aren't so separated after all. Now how do we fix this? Well, obviously, we just need to add more classes with better specificity. So using something like block element modifier or the BEM framework should help us out. So we do that, we're safe again. This markup is semantic and doesn't contain any styling decisions. And now our CSS is decoupled from our markup structure, and it avoids that unnecessary selector specificity we were dealing with earlier. But what happens if we wanted to reuse this author bio component? Maybe for some other form of content, like an article preview, perhaps. We can't just apply our author bio classes to our article preview, because that wouldn't be semantic, because the classes no longer reflect the underlying content. So how do we handle this? Well, we could just update the HTML to use article instead of author up there. And then we can just copy our CSS styles and rename them. Or we could use something like add extend in our pre-processor. So lesson, SAS, you could use extend and kind of duplicate everything. And while these approaches are semantic, they're not very dry. So maybe instead of duplicating everything, we could create a shared set of classes and call it something like media card. And this approach removes the duplication from our CSS. So that feels a lot better. But once again, aren't we mixing concerns now? Our markup all of a sudden knows that we want both of these pieces of content to be styled as media cards. So what if we wanted to change the author bio or the article bio preview? So if we wanted to do both of those things, we couldn't because we're reusing the same CSS setting. So before we could just open up the style sheet and choose new styles for each of the components. And now we have to start editing the HTML and we're right back to where we started. So here's the thing. When you think about the relationship between HTML and CSS in terms of separation of concerns, everything seems very black and white. You either have separation of concerns, which is good, or you don't, and you've written bad CSS. This is really not the right way to think about HTML and CSS. It doesn't reflect our reality. Instead, we should reframe this debate as a choice about dependency direction. And there are essentially two ways you can write HTML and CSS. The first is what we've pretty much covered, the separation of concerns approach, where your CSS depends on your HTML. So you name your classes based on your content, like author bio, that treats your HTML as a dependency of your CSS. The HTML is independent. It doesn't care how you make it look. It just exposes hooks by author bio that the HTML then controls. Your CSS, on the other hand, is not independent. It needs to know what classes your HTML has decided to expose, and it needs to target those classes to style the HTML. So in this model, your HTML is restyleable, but your CSS is not reusable. And then there's the mixing concerns approach, where your HTML depends on your CSS that everybody doesn't like for some reason. So what you do is you name your classes in a content-agnostic way after the repeating patterns in your UI, like media card. And then you treat your CSS as a dependency of your HTML. So the CSS is independent. It doesn't care what content it's being applied to. It just exposes a set of building blocks that you can apply to your markup. And your HTML is not independent. It's making use of classes that have been provided by the CSS. And it needs to know what classes exist so that it can combine them however it needs to achieve the desired design. So in this model, your CSS is reusable, but your HTML is not resizable. So the big example of the separation of concerns approach is the CSS then guarded. While UI frameworks like Bootstrap, Beaumont, and Tailwind take the second approach. So when folks say Tailwind is not semantic, they're technically right. I really can't argue with them. But I would question if that's the best way to write CSS. Because of the issues presented earlier, I'd argue it's not. But that's a debate worth having. So moving on to our second point, a lot of folks don't love how many classes Tailwind uses in the HTML. And to me, this is a statement about personal preference. Personally, I love being able to look at an element and in the DOM and know exactly how it's being presented. Other folks might not, and that's all right. But Tailwind is a utility-first framework. So you can still use it to generate the classes that you're comfortable with. My workflow involves using the utility classes first to get my initial designs off the ground, and then I'll extract components to shorten my class usages in the DOM and be a bit drier. So really, you can use Tailwind with as many or as few classes as you'd like. It's really up to you. And we'll go into how you can do that. And then finally, some folks like to point out that Tailwind seems no better than using inline styles. And that's false. Inline styles are impossible to maintain and keep consistent because you have unlimited freedom to apply whatever CSS properties and values you want, which you then can cascade and maintain throughout your application. But with Tailwind, you have to pick from a curated list of classes. So your design maintains its consistency. Plus, if you ever updated a class value, then you still get the cascade you expect. So at this point, you may have other arguments or holes to poke in these ideas. But let's save the debate for the end and at least try walking a mile in Tailwind shoes to see what it's all about. So all right, now I'm going to do something really crazy. I'm going to try a little bit of live coding here. So I'm going to cover the Tailwind installation process, show you all what the configuration looks like, and then restyle the Laravel login page. So let's look at this and how we're going to use it. So I'm going to have to go and change this. One second. All right, cool. Now, if I go to here. Okay, so these are the Tailwind docs. And I think they're pretty well thought out as far as docs go. But we're really concerned about installing Tailwind. And so if they have a CDN, you can just drop it in and start playing with the classes. But when you're using it with Laravel, you typically use it with NPM, and they actually have a really nice setup with Laravel Mix already, so it's pretty easy to get up and running with. So I've already started a Laravel new project and done some light customization just to speed this up. Really just removed some classes and whatnot. And I also installed Tailwind already, so you don't have to just watch the dump. But basically, if you look on here, where is it? Yeah, yarn add, Tailwind dev, you'll get your typical yarn install, and you're ready to go. So what's next here? So what we're going to want to do is generate the Tailwind config file. And this is where you set up all of your classes and do all the customization that really makes Tailwind so unique relative to other CSS frameworks out here. And the fun thing is this is all written in JavaScript. So you can really utilize the full flexibility of the JavaScript language instead of being stuck in CSS world where you can't often use the full functionality of a programming language. So we'll just copy and paste that in. You can provide a name, that was the option there, for what you want that file to be, but I don't really, I'll just use whatever the default is. I think it's just Tailwind.js. Great, so we've created our config file. And they've done a really nice job, I think, overall, having these nice little helper messages, and also, they've done a nice job with the helper messages, and then also the comments within the code base. So now we've got our Tailwind config. And if we open up PHP Storm here, everyone see that? Font size good?
Can you make it a little bigger?
Yeah. I do. Yeah, no worries. So where were we? Okay, so in the root of your directory, your project, you've got this Tailwind.js file now. And within here, like I said, they've done a really fantastic job of commenting everything with explanations of what it is. And this is obviously a JavaScript file. And what you can do in here is you can see basically all the default options. And that's what is explained in the documentation. They basically walk you through what all the default options are for Tailwind. And that comes out of the box. So if you guys are using a custom color scheme and your hex values for your grayscale are very different from what Tailwind provides, you can just hop in here, update them, and then when you run npm watch or production, whatever you're using to compile your CSS, these will get automatically updated within your code, with the Tailwind config utility files, or classes rather. So your color scheme can automatically cascade throughout the entire usage of the framework. So you guys can come in here and change anything. Make this large again. If you wanted to add colors, you can come in here and make your own color. There's no limit to what you can do here. You need to add, these are the default viewport breakpoints, but you can add as many as you want. If you need to add a font, you can add whatever font you want. You can keep using these font stacks. If you have a different text scale, they kind of laid out nicely here for you, but you can use whatever you like. Font weights, leading, tracking, background colors, they all use the same color object, so you're good to go. And basically, whatever you want to customize, all you have to do is hop in here. You don't have to go, I don't know if this is still the case, but it used to be you have to go to Bootstrap and like re-download your customizations every time. It's all right here in the code base for you. So you can really tailor Tailwind exactly as you need it. And if you ever need to add a utility class or update something, you just duplicate it, writing your value, writing your name. If you don't want to use this width scale, for instance, you wanted to have like a primary width and then a secondary width, it doesn't really apply to widths, but maybe your color scheme, you can totally do that as well. It's all customizable, basically however you want. Great. So that's what's going on in that config file. So now we've got to update and add Tailwind to our CSS. So what they offer here are basically these imports that and special sort of Tailwind classes here, or not classes, but imports that we'll just add to our main Sass file. We go into resources and then Sass. I have by default Laravel publishes these as SCSS files. I updated it to Sass, that's because what I use. And this is their sort of default stuff. And so we'll just come in here and grab this preflight. And we'll take that off. And then this component, so preflight is basically, they're like normalized, that kind of resets all the base styles. Components, you can actually write components for Tailwind, and there are some available out there. They don't have like a module library yet, but they're probably working towards it. So Tailwind has a plugin system that we won't cover tonight because it's a little more advanced, but you can write components and then have them automatically included within your config file, and then this is how they get rendered to your CSS. And then finally, you add the utilities last, so that way their specificity in the cascade overwrites the components and preflight stuff when we need to use it. And just like that, we've added all the Tailwind stuff to our Sass, or CSS. I'm actually going to get rid of all this stuff and delete this file, just to clean everything up.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So Tailwind is using JavaScript to generate those 3 Sass files?
Yeah, so when you compile, so they actually never touch your Sass files, but your outputted CSS files that load all of the Tailwind classes.
Okay. Got it.
So yeah, that's a really great question. So in the next step, you're going to have to set up your processing. And so you could do it inline. They've got their own sort of CLI command. But they've also got this really nice setup of Laravel Mix. So for us, since we're using Sass, we need to grab the special Sass version.
I just want to clarify a bit about his question, like just in case you were kind of confused. So it's not using JavaScript to generate CSS like in your browser when you load the page. It's JavaScript that runs on the computer that's doing the build in order to generate like a minified CSS that is on your site.
Right.
So just want to clear that up. I mean, he probably knew that, but just in case like anyone wasn't clear on that, just
No,
Yeah.
thank you, yeah.
Thanks. Cool. So we'll just grab this chunk right here. If you have, they have support for like Webpack and let's say Brunch and I think they have a goal. Yeah. So if whatever your build is, you can go ahead and do it. But this is Laravel, so we use Mix. So we'll just open up our Webpack.mix, and then I'm just going to dump this in here, and we'll just use all of this and kind of overwrite what we were doing earlier. And yeah, so they will trick you up because they know what the defaults are. I'm just going to update that. And then the path to our tailwind is just right here, so we'll just add that. And great, now we're done. And I'll move this to the top. And just like that, we have tailwind installed. So before we run prod, I just want to show you guys what the login page looks like before, because that's what we're going to be restyling. So this is the default Laravel login page. We're all familiar with it, but just to refresh everybody's memory. So that looks like this. So a bunch of classes in here. I think it's using Bootstrap. It is using Bootstrap. And they've got a whole bunch of HTML in here. So what I did was I just took out all the classes. So that's what it looks like without any classes. And then I just condensed it because they have a lot of extra HTML and divs and everything. That's kind of how Bootstrap works. You know, they need to make the structure work for as many people as possible. So their structure is very set up and set in stone. But with Tailwind, we don't need to use that much HTML. So I'm going to end up using this login condense to build it. I'm also using a different layouts file. The default one has the nav essentially, and I just took it out just to make it a little cleaner for us when we're doing our example. So I will refresh this. Controller method. It does a hard refresh. Great. So they've imported Unito, which is fine. But that's essentially what our unstyled HTML looks like. So now, if we run, and I've got an alias. Let me just run the watch. So that'll start this guy up. I'll take a second here. Cool. I think we're good. And our CSS file is pretty big. That's kind of another complaint about Tailwind is it generates so many classes that it's really heavy.
420
kilobytes. Yeah. Yep. Which yeah. Thank you.
This is for the development version. Like on production, you wouldn't actually have this file, right?
Right,
exactly.
Is it does it tree shake or?
Yeah, so what there is, the Tailwind itself doesn't have tree shaking, it just kind of generates it. But there is a purge CSS, so it's a post CSS plugin. So there's a purge CSS plugin that the Spady guys wrote up that you can just add to your Laravel mix. It's like just .purge CSS, and it just takes care of everything. Cool. They've set it up to integrate with Tailwind, so it's really easy, and you can get this down. I think on some of my sites I've got very, very small CSS file sizes. Cool. Yeah, that's kind of that process. And we're watching that, so we don't even need to worry about it. So let me just find my file here. Cool. Actually, let me pop in here. Okay. That'd be a little easier to do this way. So probably one of the first things, actually, we'll just we're going to want to do is probably take more of an atomic CSS approach, and we'll start with the inputs and the labels, and then we'll work our way up to the rest of the design. That's just my flow. If you do it the other way, no worries. So let's start. So we'll go ahead and start with the input and start writing the family. So we'll probably want to add a border radius, so that's rounded. Pretty simple. We'll change the background color. We'll make it gray, lighter. So again, those colors that we defined at the top of the config file, they work for all the utilities that Tailwind generates. So all of your background colors, all of your text colors, they are sourced from that original object of colors.
So this is BG dash and then that color from all that list?
Exactly. So if you had primary, it would just be BG primary. And that's how that would work. And so I've used this enough that I just kind of know the color scheme at this point. But over time, I think anyone can pick it up. It's pretty simple. And if you use your own color scheme, you already know it. So you're good to go. What else are we going to do here? We'll probably have no border, just because. So we'll just say border none. And what I love about Tailwind is just this is pretty easy stuff. We're kind of saying, what do I want to do? I don't want to have a border. It means border none, that's the utility. They don't go like the Tachyon's route where they have really short and small classes for that sort of, because you can attract these components, they don't really care about that. So they want to make it as readable and scripted as possible, so you as a developer can actually understand what the heck is going on with your elements. So what else do we want to do here? Rounded, I don't know, let's see how that looks for now. Cool, okay, well that's some padding. So padding, it should just be, we'll say 4, whatever that scale is that you define in your Tailwind config file. So if we search for padding, you can just set up whatever scale you want in here. And this is the great thing about Tailwind, is like this scale is here. And so if you are designing, you're not going into your vanilla CSS and picking a unit out of thin air. You're following the scale. So everything should be consistent to each other if you're using the utility classes appropriately. You have this curated list that's sort of confining and constraining your CSS choices, which leads to consistency in the final product. So we'll just add some of that. I think that should, we'll make the text color black. Just make it look a little better. I might have been too much padding. So okay, that's it. So the x-axis looks okay, but there might be too much y padding there. So Tailwind lets us do that. So we'll make px 4, and then we'll say py 2. Maybe that'll look a little better for us. Yeah, that's great. And now we've got a label there. So let's style that as a class, and we'll say that's like text medium. We'll see if that works. It might be font medium. I don't remember 100%. And let's see here. We'll make this like darkest, and we'll uppercase it, and we'll say the tracking is going to be. We'll make it loose because it's a little bit smaller. Tracking is just a space in between all the letters. So you're yeah, like that. That looks pretty good to me. And now we kind of want to stack the label on top. So we'll just say in this class and this div, we'll say the flex, we'll apply flex. We'll say that it's going to be a flex column. There are other ways to do this, it's just a fast way to do it. We're probably going to want a little bit of a margin on the bottom of our label to kind of differentiate itself from our input. Yeah, and like that. This will work really nicely, I think, for us on mobile. See how fast it was? We weren't writing CSS. We didn't have to keep going from our style sheets back to our HTML. We're just in the HTML, and we're styling the way however we want to have it happen. It's not like Bootstrap where we need to put in form input and form control, and then all of a sudden something happens and restructure our divs. This is just styling with classes in the DOM exactly as you want things to look. Great. So let's add a margin on the bottom of that, so we have some separation from our other class. Great. So at this point, you're presented with a choice. You've kind of iterated over a pattern here. And you can extract this right now and say, okay, this is how I want all of my form fields to look like. For me, that's fine. I think if that's going to be the design pattern you want to use throughout the rest of your interface, this is a perfect opportunity to do that. Buttons are oftentimes the first things that I extract. I use those all over. And to do that, all we would do is something like this. So we hop into our, that's the wrong file. Sass. And we'll come down here. We want to add it here, actually. So our utilities can override whatever we do here. So if I wanted to do like field, whatever that is, Tailwind out of the box has this add apply. And what that does is when it compiles, we can just grab these classes here and change them out for field. And then tell it to apply those classes for this new class here. Now all of a sudden, we iterate very quickly, and then we still can maintain the consistency from our Tailwind config file across all the custom CSS that we're writing. So we get consistency out of the box for free. So let's keep going with that. So we've got a label below it, and we've got an input. So just kind of using our SAS structure, we'll say label. And we'll say add apply again. And we'll just grab all this stuff. Get rid of it. Apply. The nice thing is like you don't have to add, you can add the class dot in front of it if that's what you're comfortable with. You don't have to. Yeah, we're maintaining those styles. Again, we do with the input. Just like this. Apply.
some other classes on
Did I miss
look
something?
into HTML past.
Oh, yes, thank you. Appreciate that. That should not matter. Let me just try. Did I say it? Column right there?
Also, the label is not uppercase. The label is supposed to be uppercase, right?
Oh, yeah. That should, oh, is it because?
Yeah, those are not.
Well, not being records. Huh. Well, this is new. This is the fun of live coding in front of the crowd. You're gonna have errors like this. That should work. All right.
It's just like coding with 20 judges.
Yeah, no. But you could also, if you want to follow that sort of style and be a little bit more specific with your classes, you can go ahead and do like this. I'm going to look into why that didn't work because I have style sheets that are using that, so I'm not confused. So we'll say label, and then we'll go ahead and, I'll actually get rid of that. Okay. We've got input. And label. Oh, wrong spot. Did I break something?
Oh, there it is.
There's
The
no
what?
text in D.
That's it, thank you. That is totally it. It's fine. See? Maybe this will work. All right. Now, let's recompile it. Let's just get rid of that class.
Tracking loose.
What's tracking loose?
It's this one. So that's the, I might just have this in the wrong spot, maybe. Oh, yes, I think we touched it back.
Can I ask a dumb question
Sure.
while you're doing this? So, at Tailwind and at apply
Mhm.
in a SAS file, are those functions within, like, what is the flow of the compilation here is what I'm trying to understand. Is Tailwind using SAS? Like, what exactly is at Tailwind?
Yeah, so
Is
that
that-
is just something that the,
Is it custom SAS functions from Tailwind?
so Tailwind's built on PostCSS.
Okay.
So they're leveraging that build process to, I think they inject all of their code into your SAS and then
Okay.
compile it that way.
So that's Tailwind, the at Tailwind, and the at apply, that's Tailwind as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And so is Tailwind then generating CSS of the dot field class with all the rule sets from those other classes? Like in the compiled CSS?
I believe so. That sounds right. Yes, that's a great question. So I'm not 100% sure what's going on here. And that's okay. So what we'll do is get rid of all that. And let's go back to how it was when it was working. And so that should work. And there's probably something in my config here or something that's not working for that. But typically, I won't even extract things to that level that quickly. I will continue to iterate because oftentimes when I'm designing, I find that my text hierarchy and the way I'm presenting all the information changes as I work on other elements. And the layout and the composition of the page, all that good stuff. So that was probably more for demonstration purposes than when I would actually do it. And part of me also kind of likes having all the classes right there because I can see exactly what's going on and I don't have to hop back into my CSS. That's just me. If you guys have a different workflow, that works for you. That's awesome. So that'll be in before, what a little spacing there, and let's just do the other field input. Maybe we'll do the button too, just for showing everybody what else you can do with it. Class, and then is that what's going on?
Scrap lines.
Fix that. And then perfect. All right, just like that. And so you can see how when you do extract it and the system works and everything's going to be okay, how useful that can be and how you can maintain that consistency throughout all of your designs. But yeah, we'll do the button just to show you guys some other things. Tailwind, out of the box, has some pretty good color choices, if you ask me. So oftentimes if I'm prototyping, if I just have like a SaaS idea I want to put together, I will oftentimes just use the default Tailwind colors. I think they're pretty well thought out. They're what I'm using for all the slides. So if you thought those looked good, that's just the default Tailwind color scheme. There's a button that looks a lot like the Bootstrap button. We change the color scheme, made a red button. Yeah, just like that. So pretty simple stuff. It's not rocket science here. We're really just, the utility classes are mapping to the underlying CSS. They're using descriptive class names that we can all probably recognize if we took 2 seconds to think about it. And then we just apply it and then build up our interfaces from there. So that's the flow. Any questions on that over here?
So usually, we've been using Tailwind at my company, and what I've found is that we'll let a design sit for a while before we get to the point where we want to abstract components.
Yeah.
But abstracting components does make sense, just not in like, R&D case.
Yeah, totally. Like the context totally matters. If you're in like a startup environment, the UI might not even be there tomorrow. Why are you extracting? Why are you spending the time thinking up a class name to use for all of that? It's just wasted mental.
Because you don't have to, names are the hardest thing in
Yeah.
programming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Give me a couple hours.
Just get rid of the names.
So this gets rid of all that mental processing that we're so accustomed to doing. Let me flip the displays back. Awesome. Great. So I think we've got a pretty good overview of how we can use Tailwind in real life. And while that was a nice little example, I think what we really want to know, we were kind of talking about, is how do we use Tailwind and how does it work in practice? So I can only speak from my personal experience, but I've used Tailwind with teams ranging from just me to about 5 developers of varying experience levels in different environments. And I've built roughly 3 production websites, 2 production sort of SaaS app kind of level projects, and several unfinished side projects where I've had an idea, iterated on it, and then let it sit where it's supposed to sit. So I've at least been exposed to how it works in practice. And in this time, I've seen like 3 pretty big advantages. I've seen forced consistency that I keep talking about, faster UI development, and better back-end developer experience. And I'll touch on that in a second. So in the past, I often ran into consistency issues when I've worked on teams that use Bootstrap or their own CSS. How many times has everyone overridden Bootstrap before because it's just not working for you? I know I've done it, and I've seen it done time and time again. Or how often do you just make up a new design on the spot with regular CSS? I do it all the time. And when we do that, we typically pull some sizes and spaces out of the air and make everything look good in that context. Well, if you multiply that out over the course of a project or the life cycle of a product, then you're bound to have some inconsistent UIs by the end. But with Tailwind, we don't have to write new CSS when we want to style something. Instead, we just pick a class and move on. And that's the beautiful thing, is that the class we picked is already consistent with whatever our configuration file is. Furthermore, when you do want to write that custom CSS, Tailwind makes it easy to leverage the utility classes, just like we were trying to do, to construct our custom CSS. So here's a working example from the Tailwind docs. This is just written in vanilla CSS, it looks like. But that's what we were trying to do with those add applies there. And as you can see, button blue, we just define them, we use the utilities, and they're good to go up top. So besides consistency out of the box, I've also found that Tailwind makes for faster UI development. And in the past, my development flow looked like this. I tinker in the browser and DevTools and with a few styles, trying to see how things work. And then I quickly add those styles to my style sheets because I couldn't keep them all in my head. I'm going to forget everything I was trying to do. Then I add some classes to my HTML, and then I keep tinkering until I got it all right. Now with Tailwind, I've entirely removed writing the CSS step, at least while I'm getting that first iteration done. And additionally, I don't have to keep selecting elements with my DevTools to look at the styles panel to kind of figure out and see, or looking like at the computed all the way in the bottom, to see what I have. Because I'm using descriptive utility classes in my HTML, I can just read it and have a pretty clear picture of what the styles I'm using and what I'm trying to accomplish. Furthermore, when I do write some CSS, I don't have to think very hard about what I'm going to name a class or how I'm going to keep it consistent with the rest of my styles. I'm typically only adding another utility class, which names itself generally, or if I'm extracting a component, then it's happening so rarely, I can be generally pretty descriptive about what that component is, and the name kind of comes much faster that way. So putting all of these little time savers together has made a tremendous impact on mine and my teammates' development speed. And finally, I found that Tailwind fosters a better back-end developer experience. So in my experience, I found that when a back-end focused developer is asked to do front-end dev, they really enjoy using frameworks like Bootstrap because everything is so simple. And then they hate writing CSS. I get that. I write CSS all the time, and even sometimes I pull my hair out and hate it too. But in much the same way, I found that back-end devs really enjoy the Tailwind workflow as well. And at first, there may be some hesitation because it isn't a UI kit. But once they're comfortable with it and they enjoy not having to write CSS while still being able to design the way they like to. So these are just a few of my top takeaways, but there are certainly a number of other benefits that I've seen after adopting Tailwind. For example, I found that I write less HTML. You saw what the default Laravel login page looks like using Bootstrap versus what we were working with afterwards. I also think less about my styles, and I focus more on what the design is and the tactics of that. And finally, Tailwind and Vue.js are also a match made in heaven. So using it with Vue, using the computed classes or something like that, that's really a powerful workflow. So overall, I found that Tailwind is really an awesome framework to work with in practice. Well, there you have it, folks. A world tour of Tailwind CSS. So thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, one question already, yeah.
Yeah. So you went over like a bunch of like formatting stuff, and that's really cool, like how Tailwind works. But of course, like the tricky thing with CSS is usually like the layout, and that wasn't really covered so much. Could you like talk a bit about how layouts work in Tailwind?
Yeah,
that's
a good question. So Tailwind doesn't have CSS grid built in by default, just because grids are so customizable. There's like really no way to expose all the columns and rows and whatever you're working with. So they recommend using Flex for any grid structure that you're using, and that's pretty simple. You can just use that Flex class, like basically like we did with that input component. We put Flex on it, we put Flex column in it to make it a column, and then it stacked nicely, and we just added some margins to the white space. And that's generally my approach. So I'll start at the inputs and then work my way out to the full page layout. Sometimes I'll go the other way if it's a larger layout and I have more of the structure there that I'm working on. I'll just get all the components kind of set up using Flex. And then I'll dial into whatever that element needs to do.
I typically use Flex for layout and then Tailwind for the specific style of elements.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that too. Yeah, and you can, if you want to use grid, you write your own grid. And then within those grid columns and rows, you continue to use Tailwind, continue to use Flex. That's kind of the approach I think everyone's moving towards, is CSS grid for the layout, the big picture, and then within that using Flex to do sort of more of the component level layout. And so you would write some custom CSS at the top for the overall structure, and then for those components you can use some Flex magic and make things look the way you want.
What about the responsive part of that? I noticed in the config that there were variables for widths, certain widths, like with like mobile, tablet.
Yeah.
Are those used for like displayed under block for divs, or are they applying app media stuff? Or?
Yeah, that's a really good point actually. I didn't cover it, but let me just pull it up here. And so what Tailwind has is it has these helper utilities that you can apply to other classes, and some of those are the responsive breakpoints. So not every class out of the box is responsive, but you can make any class responsive. That's just to keep the file size of the outputted CSS at a manageable level to start with. But if you wanted to, so for example, like I don't think box shadows are responsive by default, but if you wanted them to be, you could set that up in the config. Let me show you that process. So Tailwind.
It's also important to note that they take the mobile first sort of architecture. So like when you're styling things, they're starting from the smallest screen to the largest screen.
Got it.
Yeah, all the breakpoints are min width. But
Mobile first and then add additional to support desktop and spread out.
Exactly. But if you wanted it to be the other way, you could set that up in the config. They
Okay.
support both ways, but the default is the min width
Got it.
setup. So at the bottom here, you basically can come in here to all the modules, essentially what they're calling all the other objects within the styling. And so where is that box? Shadows. Down here. Oh, it is responsive. But it basically, like SVG fill, a good example, doesn't have any additional utilities added to it. But if you wanted to make SVG fill responsive, you're doing like a lot of custom animation work, whatever, or you wanted to add like hover or focus to work with that as well, you could just go ahead and add those in, and all of a sudden those classes will be outputted. And the way it works in, look at the button for instance. So the button is red right now, but if we wanted to make the hover like blue, the syntax is this: you add whatever that sort of adjustment class is at the front, and then colon,
Yeah.
and then whatever you want to be applying when you're doing that staging.
Got it.
So here, let's get a refresh it. Now we hover over it and it's blue, just
see.
like that, which I think is really awesome. Because now you're like, okay, what's the hover? Like you don't have to look through the nesting that you might use in CSS. It's just kind of right there for you.
Right.
And so this is, yeah, we'll do this one. So we'll set this to like width full, and that'll be the mobile. And then on small screens, we'll say it's like, I don't know if this will work, but we'll say it's half. And then on large screens, we can say it'll be.
Sorry, what is MD? Medium?
Medium, yes.
Medium.
So that refers to the breakpoint.
So does that apply an at media of min and max pixel to the config, and then apply that CSS to that?
So
Does it do that much?
So the classes are already outputted.
Okay.
So they already exist, and they're existing. So whenever you set up, whenever you label something as responsive in here, it will generate the media queries for those classes.
Got it. Okay.
And so let's say like 1/4. Oh, that's not the right one. And we'll see if this works for you. Yeah, there you go. So now it's full, now it's half, and now it's a quarter. That's
cool.
how you build.
So
up
it's
to it.
sort of justifiable shorthand sets of styles that do argue against, like, why not use inline CSS? Because we can read what that normally would be like 4 or 5 lines within that div, allowing you to understand design-wise what it is in the HTML. And then if you do get that crazy, you got that applied.
Right, exactly. And these are better than inline CSS because you
Yeah.
can change that config for the half to like 33%, whatever you, I don't know why you do it, or margin bottom 4. If you wanted all of a sudden to increase the white space across your application, you doubled all of your margins, that would cascade and apply everywhere.
Right.
So it's kind of like inline styles on steroids, basically.
Yeah, and it makes it pretty powerful with Vue as well, because you're doing class swapping and stuff, and you have a lot more power in what you swap. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Did you have medium and large defined in the config?
Yeah, were those
LG.
default?
Oh, those are by
Yeah.
default, yeah. So those
Okay.
are, sorry, good question.
Was that like the top of the config somewhere?
Yeah, so where was that? Yeah, so screens.
Okay.
I see, so 576.
Which those are pretty good defaults.
Right.
But if you had a billboard or something, or an iWatch to support, you
Yeah.
can go ahead and add that, maybe watch, billboard, whatever you want.
And you can still inspect your elements in the browser and see exactly how
Yeah,
it all
that's
gets
what I want
done,
to do right now.
which
Yeah.
is nice. Like, oh,
That's
okay.
cool.
Yeah.
You
And
see
you
the
can
raw
change it. You
output.
can use the Tailwind classes in the browser if you kind of like doing that thing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's cool because they are just CSS classes.
Yeah, let me show you all my workflow because I didn't realize this was not well known. But so in the sidebar here, if you go up there, so they have this .cls thing, and what you can do is you can apply the classes. This input, that's a bad example. Let's look at the button here. So for example, like you can just check them on and off, and then this will actually look at your exported CSS.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you can kind of just run through the Tailwind classes. And this is like what I work in when I'm working with Tailwind. I work in the DOM, I'll see everything, and then I'll just go add those classes and be good to go. Especially if I'm like, I want to see how something else looks. It's all right here. If you do minify it and run prod, I don't think this works anymore, or use purge CSS and you don't have these classes in your output, it won't show up there, but in watch or anything like that, it'll work nice.
Does this setup have purge set up with it?
No, not currently.
Okay, so I was just curious on what that file size would be.
Yeah. Maybe we can-
So being that
This file would be very small.
I'd be curious to see actual CSS frameworks tailwinded in a way, like Bulma and Bootstrap just stripped down.
I was just
a
gonna
bunch of
ask the same
files.
question,
Yeah.
is
It'd be
technically
pretty
you can
cool.
configure that to almost match Bootstrap's class structures.
Someone has tried to do a Tailwind Bootstrap. People are working on it.
Yeah.
It's pretty, everything's pretty open source around it.
They don't have the resources Twitter has, you mean?
Yeah, right.
Bootstrap is a little crufty though, like it has all the stuff you don't need.
There's like a Tailwind themes page that's up right now. So if you want to
Yeah,
buy a
that's
theme,
cool.
That's a thing now. They're also looking for people to make themes. I think you get a cut. So if you want to practice, that's a good way to practice it.
So like how new is this? Like is Tailwind basically? Is it still in like beta or is it like out?
I think they just did .7. So that's where it is in the release cycle. It came out a year
Nova
ago.
uses Tailwind, right?
Yep,
Yeah,
Nova uses
yeah.
Tailwind. I know a lot of apps that are using it in production. I'm using it in production. They are pretty good about not doing breaking changes. They're really just adding functionality or streamlining the JS build. So they're really not changing the classes. Maybe one or two tweaks here and there, or they're adding a class. So I'm not terribly. Or the plugin architecture, that was awesome. That was a big +1 for the framework. So for instance, like I don't love the default height classes they produce, but I made a npm package plugin that you just add to your Tailwind build, and now I get all the height utilities I wanted. So people have made grid ones. That would be a good way to go about doing like a layout file or the bootstrap of Tailwind.
You said you have a couple projects in production with Tailwind, and you said you've been using it at work as well. What about the situation where you get to a ton of applies or a ton of your own classes and stuff? Do you notice your watcher slowing down at all? Like,
Are you talking about just compilation?
compilation process, or even runtime as you're writing? Like I use HMR a lot for a lot of projects, and so with my HMR setup, I want to be as quick as possible with getting that out. So like,
Watch is
I just wonder
fast.
if it's still,
Compilation is slow.
Yeah.
The compilation is definitely slow, but if that's
and that's
if
the
part-
purging and stuff that happens like when you
Yeah.
send it out or something like
Right.
that.
It's probably about a minute,
Yeah.
45 seconds for just start to finish compilation, but watch is immediate, just sort of like your CD here.
Yeah.
It does different changes and
Mhm.
swaps it out.
Have you set up mix to use like browser sync and stuff like that? Like I do that all the time, and that's pretty awesome. It's just like everything's there.
Cool.
How hard is it to get it working with module reload?
Yeah.
Like browser sync and stuff like that?
No, like just like sort of like React Webpack where it will swap out like the only modules being effective for the DOM.
Oh, I don't know. I don't use React, so.
I've
that's a good
noticed
question.
some tools out there that support Tailwind for Vue. I don't know about React, but I'm sure there's something out there we can find.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's a good follow-up question. 'Cause you're talking about Vue, and then you also mentioned Vue. Is there like sort of some like integration between like Tailwind and Vue that's like pretty exciting, or?
Yeah, I can't remember if it was the Tailwind team or someone in the Vue community, but they've set it up where you can, in your single file components, use the utility classes.
Yeah.
So that's set up, like not necessarily like in that HTML that's in there, but actually like in the style section of those single file components, you can include them there and they'll get compiled. So they've got that integration set up. You can use them to, I mean, it's just the output in CSS, so we could always use it in the DOM section of the single file component, so that's totally supported. It was just that like extra style processing that they were doing. So that's out there. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a popular framework called Nuxt.js for Vue that has the single file component all set up, and they have a boilerplate CLI where you start a new project and then you choose your CSS framework, which has Tailwind in that.
Oh, awesome.
That'd be a good starter to see, how, because that has HMR as well.
Mhm.
So that'd be maybe a good starter to figure out how they're doing it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
In the beginning, you showed that it's on a CDN as well.
Yeah. So
Was
if you-
that like just a minification of all the default Tailwind classes that you get in that 420?
Exactly. Yeah.
But that doesn't, you still gotta have your config file generate all your colors and BG stuff though?
No,
Or
the CDN is just the default stuff.
just all the default stuff?
Yeah.
It's like a bootstrap CDN.
Okay.
So you can't customize that, but if you have like an idea and you're just like, oh yeah, hackathon, you don't want to build your build.
Okay.
And customize the
Because
styling that
it
much,
seems
yeah.
like some of the classes were generated from colors and sizes.
Mhm.
Is that something you'd always have to host yourself, of course, because it's not pre-done, right?
Yeah, you'd always have to, in your dev environment, do some sort of build and then push the
Got
unified
it.
version up to production.
And that's probably like a small percentage of the whole framework, right?
Yeah, that's when you purge it out and you only have your 50 classes that you end up using out of the thousands or so. Right? So.
Cool.
You can also take stuff out of the config, because the config is gonna propagate out all the classes. But that's
Yeah.
kind of a painful way to do it.
Huh.
Yeah, that config is yours, so like you update your Tailwind, that's never getting overridden. So whatever your project setup is, that's how it is.
I've never found my CSS to be the bottleneck. I wish to be that
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Boy, that's always the quickest part.
Yeah. Cool.
Nice job, man.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, yeah. Well, that's it, folks. I believe we still have some pizza and brownies left, so if you'd like to grab some, or you can just take the whole box, I'm not going to stop you. Same thing with the Sprite and the Coke. Yeah, if you are interested in speaking, we've got availability for next month's meetup, so if you'd like to, just reach out and let me know. Otherwise, thanks for coming. Have a good night. Good job.
It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
David?
Daniel.
Daniel, sorry.
It's okay, I'm all the time.
Yeah.
Is this one yours?
No, Jan. Did you get the XR?
So what do you want to present next?
You could teach us UX.
I could.
You know, like, quick little 30 minutes.
That's my lecture.
This is how you UX.
What's my buddy Michael?
I was late.
I'm
running late. I don't know. I always do mix. Mix just adds
Yeah.
the
Mopac?
traction. Yeah, Laravel's whole thing is just making it easy to use the abstraction. So mix just makes Webpack non-big. I have done like a US game before and set up like that was before like
I don't know. No, but that sounds really awesome. Egg rolls.
There's 7
restaurants,
and they are
not the best egg rolls.
They're
size egg rolls. It's not like they're big.
That makes my mind immediately go to
One of those days.
making a burrito egg roll.
Yeah.
I still like that.
That's San Francisco thing. You can't read it here.
Okay, so we're going to visit something called corruption. All right. All right, so
Can I do Taki Dust?
SFTP download. That's a provider with a It's okay. SFR. Here's the DSA keys. No, stop. The host keys.
They're like,
configuration chain.
home, well, I guess they're like
Is okay. SFTP. Oh yeah, that's where
Takis are like,
Okay,
they're
I
like,
fixed the thing with that.
Hold up Frito, right?
Turns
Yeah,
out because
do you know what a taquito is?
don't
Yeah,
actually
I
have.
So it's like a really tiny taquito,
project.
directly on the inside.
All three of them
Because it looks like credit card.
Laravel,
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's not-
because they like
except for like.
So there's the fast code which does that, and then there's the standard code which.
What do you work on?
You specify specify file name.
Project
is
this
content
publishing
purchasing
that's actually content providers and content creators. I would kind of like a
rebuild it in
I'm convinced that the
second project is
I don't know what the percentage is of people use who just stuff on the DNS to actually know how to write software, but it's higher than the learning.
Teaching a class.
Well, I think okay. So
Like bootstrap.
I'm part of that.
This sort of tool, project I'm working on.
got some proposers
Nice. Are you building this for your company or?
So like, I have a little dev shop.
So
and I
there was
contract
back in
out
the
companies who just want like a dev shop.
hey, by the way, this other person's like, maybe
Yeah.
I should switch as like the FTP things.
What about you?
So I work for
Using the underlying
a,
library, which is actually super software. The
Oh,
guy actually
cool.
knows what he's
So
doing.
we have ads that
But
I
it
build
was
Laravel
an entirety different libraries, but it's just
Okay.
track all
Right.
Standards.
Everybody else is like.
So very
the
easy.
incentive program.
That's
So it's all
also-
upside down.
Essentially, like there's websites where
That's called regression. And we have
website,
random
have like
on
certain
any
ads.
environment.
We're not picking up purchase on surveys.
Tailwind style.
And that's one term I would not say. They have all of the, they have all the travel.
Yeah.
And like the advertising. Brokerage is like
I did a couple of
supply
Laravel
shifts
shifts last night after.
So I basically throw up what's.
So I have that in access all the way.
In real life, you'd say.
Okay, it's the resume or the app.
Eventually,
No, it's not.
It's a list of things that people do.
Right, yeah.
You know, whether it's sign up for free trial.
Right, I'm sorry.
Fill out a survey about.
Because it'll actually block you out
Okay,
of
cool.
text.
Yeah, there's sort of.
Cool, now I get to that. It's interesting,
I went
the
from
data
5.5
side of
to
it, it's
6.5
always
7,
interesting.
and
When it starts getting big.
5.6 to 7 thing was like a non-event.
What?
Versus 5.6 thing because it was
this
really
case, around this time of day, in this area, or something like that.
They have like a. Built a system, like they built a system
Default
that works
information
with
of the
us,
app.
to put doorways in front of offers.
Okay.
So you can say,
Yeah.
It's
all that
Or, you know, are you interested in this? Give us your email. You know, there's so.
Yeah, well, he actually, the
Yeah.
PR that should build, you know, it will complain if you don't have an app as the default space.
Yeah.
It's easy to make all this stuff in
Yeah, it's quick.
Right.
Basically, with something like, yes, people like doing this, but the best practice is just to use app.
Eloquent.
No.
Yeah.
I don't want.
Exactly the same as Eloquent, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Some of the JSON.
Better than something like
Like that, or is it like, are you using the native?
In MySQL, Eloquent builds in a whole bunch of stuff to do other searching.
Oh, within JSON, okay.
Yeah, you can do that in MySQL, but
You guys ever work with?
It's
it's more recent.
I always have to say to you guys,
Sorry. Place to
my
Last
name.
name.
sooner.
You should look back really well.
Oh, yeah, it's cool. I went on a MongoDB.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Genesis was a Mongo, Laravel, Eloquent. There was some.
You should just have,
Yeah.
really Laravel Austin, but just like front-end JS.
So you have zero migration.
Yeah, it's actually funny.
Awesome, scary at the same
Most
time,
popular
you know.
meetups.
I like using
Mongo as either on AWS or this one on Tailwind.
Sure.
Alright,
Yeah.
so
Like
like
when
HB
You like the
sites.
gambles.
Running through
It's like hard.
Yeah.
So the
Build analysis.
Yeah, no.
Right.
It's what you call that.
Yeah, and normalizing that's a.
Yeah.
And it's not just
hiding things.
Yeah.
So I'll grab, you know, pretty significant size data.
Yeah.
Stick it in on
Yeah.
as a
It turned out pretty
Yeah.
well.
grab that out as needed.
Yeah.
Minus the fact that I had an entire site.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Just utilize, keep it on your storage where you need it. But with great
Slides, but they're just kind of
you know, finesse deals. And like my favorite thing is on, this is years when I think there's a side-by-side comparison. SQL Core, Mongo, because my thing is value is like, what if they for this thing, is can't, you know, like dynamo and stuff like that.
This is like a beginning of.
But I saw that, I was like, okay.
It's not as slow in the long terms, but it's not slow in the compilation days.
Oh, and
Yeah.
that's right.
I had some buddies who started companies and stuff, and they're all in labs. And all they did was provide AWS cloud instance to spit up MongoDB instances on it. They got blocked by Mongo.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm gonna try to work there.
So it was like
Random things that I mentioned.
and it was such a cool little thing. You just walk in the lab, you like, give me a sandbox server.
Oh,
you don't even worry about it. And I got there involved with the clients, and they're like, okay, we'll do some impressive servers. And we did a couple of times where I was like, bring it all down. The smaller one, we bring it all down, and they had like a full-on reference. And I just used their tool to like bring down nodes individually. And it was like, it's so fun how it decides the master slave based on the set like, it's so cool. Yeah.
There's a company here in town called Object One.
Object One.
Although I don't know.
They will basically like take over your website.
Oh, search.
They
Fully managed. Redis Hadoop and
yeah, it's like they'll basically take your data center stuff, figure out where they're automatically so that you can use those technologies to let out
what's their cost?
It's pretty high.
Yeah, right.
But it's,
Do they want to sell?
a lot of these things are pretty expensive because they're memory. Whenever it's memory,
That's why I insist on driving.
it's insanely expensive. It's really hard to scale memory, right? It's also-
And your profile.
Everyone needs to even the how many systems use their motherboards that they're extinct. What did you do? What do you mean? Yeah, they're here in Austin.
That's cool.
Yeah, they're
Great SaaS.
what'd you say?
What a great SaaS.
You broke it.
They small SaaS. Provided this. So that's
And like, if when they provide it, I heard the cost of actually fixing so like they wouldn't dare. They could use out that jam.
There's sometimes so I talked about my first license, creators, cross-bodies they could buy. Hired reviews, right? They're still kind of learning on the one thing they have to be a great little SaaS. You basically want to show what the creators are worrying about. So there's a here's a video file.
Well, right, so I heard that
So it's a great talk. I was super excited. Like everybody I know is it's not just a competitor, but
But anyway,
you might as well.
You're not sure each might be like that. Yeah, really love it.
here generally shifting and
You need to go through.
That's the only, that's why it's amazing right now.
We had a few things we want to change, and so I'm trying to build it. You're like, well, we already know CSS. And then they just, you know, like, we're not super. And they were just like, that's right. It varies.
But to just save the file, and then give it a second order, it just start adding up. So what happens is the HTML hooks up to and then reinjects the CSS. Okay. So it's past the step of like lines of code.
Full circle.
You can inspect it, you can put like what did, but so you see at the bottom you have like your data, and your data's got like, you know, on and off. You can change 1, 0, right in the file.
I'm going here. I'm going here.
Yeah.
Oh, really? And they and it's like, well, oh, I can't believe that's.
First of all, I just found this out. Yeah, I haven't gone that route at all. People that actually announced earlier put breakpoints and stuff.
Right.
I still haven't gone there.
Just do what you need.
That solves a problem.
So like,
Yeah, right.
I was happy to do that because it's like that's when it redirects. The information in desktop does not like just like if you're in a page and what you had there is no longer in that. You can't like
yeah, I went back.
it's really boxy. And so I had to put a break in on the for loop so that it wouldn't actually redirect on the next page. It's like I'm used to that. I didn't even know that how I would solve that.
How come I can't get to my stuff?
One thing I thought I had to know about is I had this project that I was built for, it's called We Are Apartments, North American apartment community. It's like the company that you talk to.
Yeah.
And what they found is provide documents and information, or that contract company's lawyers provide specific documents, here's like all the information about so what they did this time is all PDF order of your PDF print, not just print, but like actually wanted a PDF. Have this PHP tool like Chrome to PDF thing, but I'm not gonna freaking write some CSS, then go to PDF and look at the freaking. You go into program tools, you go to settings, more settings, and then rendering options. And you can change your app media set to the browser. So you can sit in print mode instead of
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah.
and then there's a little tool so you can see
Yeah, I
like
forgot that web patch.
the account by 11, so I can make sure
So, unless it suddenly decides to rise like a
Yeah.
And like that has to
still gotta be
yeah,
meetup.
because that's
And
how
it'll probably
every
be-
company wants their employees.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Is in a PDF.
I'll probably do is just
Yeah, it was a little, because at the same time, like, bunch of charging graphs,
and then
and I use Chart.js stuff, and they can't do that, our goal is, yeah, it's not gonna catch it in time and stuff, so after you get print, it has to
feel
like,
free
check
to-
all that stuff.
Sorry.
I'm glad.
Feel free to submit.
That's the thing.
It's amazing. There's so much interesting stuff.
Requirements to get some time.
There's some really nice stuff to learn about like that, where you can figure out.
Yeah, until the pizza's coming, we all
like what on your page is cycles or
Oh,
It's really interesting. Stuff is around that.
What's their group lighthouse? It's a Google tool. You throw your site in it, and it gives you a big but it breaks it down to PWA.
I have 3 of them, and that's what
And the coolest thing about it is there's no CTA.
Yeah, right. Also,
Whether
I'm
they're
concerned
great.
with doing
Your website
this.
sucks.
Because it's never gonna be 100%. No, you don't need our business.
Yeah, it's not fair to something else.
So what's your setup?
Yeah, we'll talk to you, just bring your questions.
So I don't actually go
A lot of questions.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
School.
But I think what will happen is 3 people, your questions will roll in, along with me, and we'll answer myself, and there'll be the So,
especially for like a night like this.
Is there a way to gauge that? Like, I come in and say, I'm gonna be a UX person, I'm gonna be a UX
I gotta look at a hammer.
yeah.
You're like, you can see your 12 year here.
Okay, so
I would like to
this
know.
life, you may have like wide range of questions about anything.
I'll do next one.
Thanks for looking at and finding
Next one? Do that next one.
Whatever, there's like a 2 whatever.
Questions.
Yeah.
And that can be,
What one of the things I need to start doing, so
you
you
just have to
is update the
Do you,
so that
are you an employee there? Do you guys ever contract
ask
teachers?
them
Let's
about
say,
like,
hey, next question.
ask is like, what is something you'd like to learn?
so I'm employed.
It's just like you start getting.
So we update our
people want to hear about, because I asked verbally, and asked like, how long have you been doing this for? 3-5 years now, and everyone's like,
Okay.
you got it.
We say,
I
yeah,
hear nothing.
we'll let the students.
The other question I wanted to
Okay.
ask is actually a question that asks
Instructors essentially act as like the
which
cheerleaders.
is,
Okay.
basically
So we
kind of like
we
this.
have a nice touch, but we kind of help guide the
What is
students.
a question that you'd like to
Cool.
answer?
Cool thing is they're kind of like a.
So like even then, if they don't
Yeah,
show
kind of,
up,
but
I
we
can
do
just
it.
like,
We-
hey,
we-
so
we-
here's all
we-
the questions that people
Okay.
submit.
And
And
so
I read
UX
them out
students
and
actually
then see if I can answer
research
research
skills, you know, like this,
Uh-huh.
hand off mock-ups.
And while you're there, you might as well add.
They'd actually cover that.
Was the,
The catch is like, we have to, bulk code it.
I'm always the page that one question, it's just like,
Sure, that makes sense.
They can have the.
water horse-sized,
Yeah,
right,
Or,
a million
like an idea.
duck-sized horses, and see what people say.
Training.
Not how much control
When I was in
over,
San Francisco,
you know,
there
the
was
push
something.
that I have.
no, what you do is you
Yeah,
add
that's
the long
a
page,
little
you know.
profile.
Yeah.
I love it.
I have a
Sorry,
feeling
this
that the
is
rest of the
the
group
whole
maybe
time.
won't bother.
One of my biggest passions.
Yeah.
Switch the
I'm sorry, I thought you
question
were
every
on
phrase.
the.
No, well.
I'd love to see the
in
response.
Slack.
Actually, I feel like that'd be kind of fun, is like, at lunch session, like, hey, so you probably noticed we started asking some really bizarre questions. So we've taken all the answers we compiled and broke down the responses we got. Oh my god, it was so much fun, we should do that. Before tickets go on, like, reels, like, non-blind sale, we should do that.
So probably you have an idea with you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna
Like,
do it.
oh,
I'm gonna do Red's topic, but I'm just gonna do
Yeah,
it.
it's-
Just be like, hey, by the way.
Just think of a
You
simple
limit it to one question,
Yeah.
and you
I need a SAS where
Yeah.
I give you URL.
Rotate it every
You
month.
give me-
November.
Use like
Oh my
Chrome
god,
here or
this is gonna
something,
be amazing.
you know, make a nice
Yeah.
screenshot into a file.
Yeah.
Something else.
Yeah, certainly, that's an idea that I was hoping here.
The other thing,
Playing time meet them soon. I kind of, next year, I kind of have this
Have you thought about a project where
of
you
how
have a
to
good
like
version written?
identify.
Or at the end of the project, they can compare,
so
so they can build browsing.
Yeah.
well, when they do their internal projects,
Yeah.
you do typically have like categories, like,
Right.
Topics
so
that are adding to Laravel.
Something to compare to.
Yeah, and then
we don't show them all the reference.
basically.
Yeah.
But
Two.
the other thing I'm gonna say is, so like, we had like big
This
class.
topic.
So I just,
Put
put an idea out there.
That might help us start by teaching
That might be
better
hard
than
to
this
do.
last week.
And
Also give us
and you
another
could say, oh, I think that was the one I
Try
tried.
to be able to see.
You didn't have to go down all
Yeah,
the
right,
rabbit hole.
yeah, just run it.
Yeah, right.
Get organized.
But, yeah, like the foundation for the.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
So why do you think that's such a tennis today?
This was fun to talk.
Where Austin is?
Yeah, I legitimately think
What's that?
it's all remote.
Oh, it's all remote.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's written like.
So no
blog posts every week
location
about it.
whatsoever?
We have like the
And it's just
headquarters
me
and
presenting
that
those.
are.
What are you using for like?
And you said, well,
Like
what
for charity?
Well,
So
that surprised me. I was like, wow, I can't believe this is curious people here.
Yeah, I wasn't even expecting it. Yeah, Miko texted me, she's like, oh yeah, like two of my coworkers from Apple.
I mean, there's
Like,
like, isn't there a thing?
I know, one, I didn't get a chance to ask. Though.
What's the one that
Gil
Gil
covers
covers?
like right there, so I'll have to pitch them. If not, I'll just ask her to ask them.
What is it called?
I'm like, hey, so what we got?
Yeah, it's
this
freaking
one?
electron.
Yeah, versus, you know, all
Isn't
the
there a
7,000 others.
fucking collab?
I know her excuse, which is she doesn't have
VS
trouble.
Code has.
VS Code has that too?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I didn't
One
know
of
they
the
hated
things
me that
that
much.
we do like a round back to the instructors.
Her excuse this
Like,
time was
that's
that
fun
I'm
music,
sick.
you guys
Oh,
like
you
it.
guys think-
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an awesome place.
Yeah, exactly.
I started working there
But,
about, it's almost 3
yeah,
months
I'm
ago.
curious
It's
if
really
they're
been
like-
one of the
Apple's
Apple's
really
I can't make it again.
Yeah, exactly, that's that one.
And
I'm curious if they
you're
showed up
remote?
specifically
Yeah.
because of the front end talk.
Well,
Which,
yeah,
then-
but-
Lambda.
That's something
You
to
know,
know.
it's like,
Yeah,
do stuff
and
like
then I
Galvanize,
know, like
you know,
next year, I
Galvanize.
should
Yeah,
be
kind of
focused
thing.
on.
And they were great because
front end
we
topics,
get
like we did a Vue.js
their
this year.
space as
Pretty
well as
Yeah.
part of like the thing
Uh,
teach and we
And my
said,
buddy's already been jet.
good copy of
Or
the.
Yeah,
Vue.js
right.
stuff.
That's awesome.
Good internet.
And I love that it's all.
Same, yeah, so they started out there, because they started as a boot camp.
And like two
As
weeks.
a regular.
He was like, yeah, I got the thing, and it's broken, but I do all React.
I think they've always
Talk
like
about
the
Vue.js
thing, but
Sure,
Yeah.
fine, why not?
Afterwards, but
Yeah.
they
Um,
were more of a
It
boot
was
camp.
obvious. I mean, like, it was a talk, but
Yeah.
Boot camp or
So,
the theme's not the most important thing to
really a
do.
standard boot camp.
no, it definitely wasn't. So, that
that
being said, next time
Yeah.
they're like, hey, it's about React.
So you teaching
work
Kale
all the
this
time.
year?
Yeah.
No, I'm not actually, because
Do you get a
Yeah,
choice
so
of what you
I have a
want
feeling
to
front is
present to
something to
the
focus on.
students?
yeah, so
It-
I
it
teach
reacts,
UX stuff, so it's mostly
post
like
call.
research and
Yeah,
product design.
what the heck is with
I
all
can
the
use
new
it,
React
actually, that'd be
stuff?
fun, but.
I mean, it's just like,
What are they
so
what
new
is it even?
and
I don't know.
So have something like that
We have a React project
in
that's
the
working
school or
on
something.
front end dev.
I just
I've
remember
been
like
doing front end dev
going to
recently,
college
just
in
like
like
other pages,
90s,
design, figuring out.
years
what
and years and
CSS
years
is.
until something like that
Oh,
gets
look,
into
sketch
actual
file.
textbook.
Never used one of
Yeah,
these.
right.
Oh, look, this
Yeah.
design was a pain in the ass.
It's
I'm
cool
really
to
good
see
at
that
this.
students
Thanks,
these days
Robert.
jump on such new and competitive like libraries.
Yeah, totally.
I kind of, this year kind of felt like.
But, yeah, I mean, whole school's on Slack.
Like, work is keeping me
Oh,
alive.
that's cool.
Like,
So
here
Slack for
and,
chat.
Yeah, Slack for chat.
jobs.
And then Zoom for.
Have
Zoom
and
for
Longhorn
videos.
on, like, oh, I'm actually like
For a fully remote
busy
company.
enough that I
That's
probably
all
need
you
to
need.
put a lot more planning
So-
than what I do.
How does the rather than, I guess.
No, well,
just-
I was just gonna say, thanks so much for the talk.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Hey, so we met last time.
We did, didn't we? Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
no worries.
Basically.
Anyway, yeah, but thanks.
Yeah, take care.
All right, guys, we'll see you.
Thanks for the ideas, too.
All right.
Yeah, no worries.
Good talking.
Yeah, likewise.
I don't ever
That
use
sounds like
Blade,
more of
I
like
don't
a-
use, it's just all JSON.
Yeah, so something like that.
And then everything went.
Well, yeah,
The
but
thing
it
is,
is you, but it
I
could
love
be
the
the
Laravel,
Yeah, I'm not
language
saying it's too far away from
translation,
that.
stuff like
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, it's
Double-edged sword.
yeah, it's all right.
So,
Very good.
I kind of was getting in the way with going with localization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I love that. Laravel API shit broke.
Yeah,
And then it's like, hey, so here's what this outage was
I have
about.
this library.
Somebody
that I
used it,
finally
easy to
published.
fix.
It's just like a bunch of helpers.
Or our favorite,
As
the
an
outage this
API,
week,
and it provides benchmark.
pants on fire.
And then what it does is you use like
Oh, look, the
Laravel
third party
validation
provider
stuff.
that basically
So
powers
if you make
a
3
majority
or 4
of our
validations,
platform
I
outside
need
our
my
custom
needs
logic.
string, I need.
They accidentally deleted the thing and then wrote all the
that.
accounts.
So you use it just the same,
Yeah.
but my
We think
helper
that we have a
will
logic
compile
that's like
a
reprocessed
bunch
shit
of
and-
stuff under the endpoint to allow you to look at the
So that's
endpoint
was
and see
fine,
everything.
but it was a
you
fun
need. So
few
you kind
minutes
of,
where
and it's like
everything
all
was
JSON
like,
guys, you
oh,
look at the
shit,
endpoint and, oh, I need to put an ID and I need to put an active.
So it's kind of like
Actually, I forgot to mention.
It's exactly that. It's a common API.
Oh, cool. That's fucking awful.
Toolkit.
And
And
we
if
can't
you're
really
in
do
depth
anything
mode,
about it until after it's
I
fixed,
have
and then we can
this JavaScript library that pops up and it makes the JSON all interactive.
Oh, cool.
And then it supports
Automating
JSON.
this or building
You
some
use
sort of
that.
fault
You
tolerance
supply a
around
callback
the
and
single
it'll
point of
do that
failure
also.
we
Yeah.
have.
Surprised I EA by that Laravel itself, but.
I don't know how we do that.
Oh, that's
Third party that we
Yeah.
HTTP calls,
This,
very
guide
into.
Yeah, I'll give you the link inside.
Yeah, yeah, it's
It really needs some help. with that
Yeah,
validation.
it's like- so
Yeah,
it's
it's acid/.
The problem is,
Yeah.
alright, so we have the proxy, we can send the data to the information, we try,
I'm
but
not
what do we
as
do for the
bummed
rest of
about
our
brain
API
now.
calls? We just assume everything worked,
Yeah.
hope it's gonna work later.
I mean, you effectively.
All right, I'm gonna give
Yeah,
my.
take care. That will.
Have a good one, guys.
Yeah, everyone.
And
Probably gonna take off too, but,
Yeah,
thanks for
nice
having
piece of
me.
cheese
I
pizza.
can't eat it, but sorry.
okay, fine.
Well, yeah, thanks again for letting me talk. That's what I did, you know.
No, actually.
That's not okay.
That's my obvious.
Oh, we can just stack them on top.
That's okay, I know the
Okay.
Truth be told.
If you want to eat it, no, I'll just take it to the front desk. You already touched it, it's yours now.
But,
I know about order either of these, so.
Yes, Longboard's gonna be great. Yes, we weren't here, but I did plug it and mention that Lineberg tickets were on sale.
Good.
So you're welcome.
You just made a talk yet? Yeah, you did.
not yet, no, but, I do wanna write one, at least one or two proposals, so.
You
Okay.
sure? I'm gonna go till December 15th.
I know, I just need some time to sit down and think and come up, but I probably do.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, well, thanks again, and, next one's December 6th or something?
Yes.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you get an inkling for something else to talk about,
Yeah,
feel free to let me know.
Yeah, totally. I definitely can talk about this, view, whatever. Laravel, I know about the Laravel stuff, so. What else? Cool. All right, have a good one, guys.
You too.
Okay. I think I'm gonna go walk over to High Mountain, work from there.
Nice. I need to actually finally have dinner. I never actually expect Eric to, but I wish I would just get over and ask him, like, could you just provide a pizza for me? So I don't starve the entire meetup.
That's why, Daniel, we're, unless you can prove beyond a freaking shadow of a doubt that everybody's gonna be able to eat decently at North by Northwest, we aren't going there.
Yeah. I mean, push comes to
I saw the guy in there, he's gonna stall. You're gonna like talk to security, but what are you gonna do?